Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this, the fourth in our current series of CHF talks on the lost and abandoned places of the Commonwealth. This time we're hearing from Peter Francis, who's going to talk to us about Port Royal, Spanish Town and Clarendon and challenges for Jamaica's built heritage. I shan't say much about his talk because he's much more eloquent than I am. He'll be able to describe all of that himself. But it's useful for us to know a little bit about his background. He was born in St Andrews, next to Kingston in Jamaica. He trained in the UK as an architect, having moved to the UK as a teenager to complete his education. And after many years' experience working in Jamaica and the Caribbean, as well as in the UK, in the housing, building refurbishment, historic restoration and conservation sectors. More recently, he's been working back in the Caribbean for a number of years in collaboration with British architect Oliver Cox and also with Anne Hodges, restoring buildings and looking at principles of sustainable development. He's on the technical committee of the Jamaican National Trust, and he's now teaching at the Caribbean School of Architecture. So as well as sharing his knowledge with them and the up-and-coming generation of architects, he's sharing his expertise, his interests with us, and we're looking forward to learning more about the architecture in Jamaica and lost and abandoned places that we are studying in this series. Peter, over to you. One last thing, by the way, please. We run a chat box and people should be able to put their questions within that and then we can review those as we go along. Victoria's going to curate it and we'll have questions at the end. Peter's going to talk for around about 45 minutes or so and then there'll be time for questions thereafter. So away we go, Peter. Thank you very much and over to you.
All right. I'm not sure how many parts of the world I'm talking to, but good evening to you folks in the UK. It's early afternoon here in Kingston, Jamaica, in the Caribbean Sea. Thankfully, the lights are on and the internet is working, and let's hope that everything proceeds nicely and smoothly for the next few minutes while I try to talk a little bit about some of the places in the Commonwealth that I've been involved with, exposed to, which I lament in many cases, but in many cases are such special places that I'm happy to share a little bit about them with you today. So as you see on the map, I'm going to be talking about four places. The Naval Hospital in Port Royal, two places in Port Royal, which is near to Kingston, the Naval Hospital and the old military lab, also known as the Garrison Building. And then we're going to saunter over to Spanish Town, which used to be the capital of Jamaica. And we're going to look at Manchester House, which is a Jamaican Georgian building. And then we're going to head further west. And Francis said it was in Clarendon. In actual fact, I've put St. Anne. In fact, the town is extremely close to two parishes, one Clarendon in the south and the other one St. Anne in the north. So we're taking you a little bit to the interior of Jamaica to look at a very simple but important brick chimney, which is in a place called Cave Valley in St. Anne. So that's the geography of where I'm going to be taking you in Jamaica today. And the four places we're talking about, forgive my little rainbow sort of whimsy, but on the left you see a map of Port Royal, 1822 Burns map of Port Royal, which has a circle showing where the Naval Hospital is, and then where the rainbow line sort of twirls in the yellow, that's where the Garrison Building is. And then we saunter all the way over to Manchester House, which is the black and white photograph bottom right, and then we head up to Cave Valley in Clarendon, border of St. Anne. So those are the four places we're going to look at today. And we're really talking about looking at four things: the original status of these buildings, the current status of these buildings, the challenges that have been posed by these four structures, and a little bit about the possibilities to talk about. Of course, we're talking about lost and abandoned buildings, but really and truly, abandoned buildings are never really truly abandoned if we have anything to do with them. So the first one that we're going to look at is the Naval Hospital. And of course, this is a very, very famous building. It's uh, it's known as the largest cast iron structure in the Western Hemisphere. It's about 330 feet long by about 60 feet wide. And it is a structure which replaced an earlier structure which was built in brick on the same site, and which replaced a number of other structures which were in the possession of the British Navy after sort of up to and during the point after the point of the great earthquake of 1692. And so you would be aware that Port Royal was is the western military base for the British Navy in the Caribbean, the eastern military base being in Antigua at Nelson's Dockyard. So Port Royal is the place where the British Navy serviced its vessels, had its fleet, which served the Western Caribbean. And so Port Royal is an extremely important place. And the reason why there was the need for such a large hospital was very little to do with fighting with Spanish and French vessels, but actually had a lot more to do with just the experience of the British in Jamaica and the Caribbean and getting used to the climate. There was an awful lot of loss through yellow fever and dysentery and other things, but also, of course, through the fact of just having an extremely large naval presence. They had to have a large infrastructure, including hospitals. So, in fact, the two buildings that I'm going to be talking to you about in Port Royal, one of them is the hospital, the other one is a military laboratory. So this building was designed by Edward Hall. It replaced, he was a very famous architect who built in cast iron and was renowned for building in cast iron in the UK in a number of very strategic and important places, including for the British Navy. And this particular building, which, as you see in the plan, basically contains 6 wards, brick wards there. And this building was actually built in 2 phases with the 3, I think is it the 2 inner or the 4 inner? I can't remember exactly, but the inner wards being built in the first phase and then the extensions to them built when more land was available. So it was built in 2 stages, and as you can see, it was effectively built as a modular building, a precast building, one of the early precast structures, which at the time would have been a cutting edge technology in the early part of the 19th century. And this building was erected in 1818 and has stood in place for all that time. And is much beloved by the people of Port Royal. In fact, it's one of the places in Port Royal which, after serious hurricane and other storm events, people take refuge in because it's one of the most stable, strongest sites on the peninsula. But the cast iron element in it, and you can see I've written that the structure is cast iron, brick, slate, and stone. So effectively what you have is a series of brick wards. And if you look at the middle photograph on the left, on the upper floor, you'll notice that it seems to be a continuous building, but in actual fact, an architect from Jamaica who set this building up as the National Museum in the 1960s actually connected those wards on the upper floor. So at one time, or up until 1988, This building was actually in the National Museum of Jamaica and contained thousands of artifacts, including from Port Royal. The reason why I really wanted to put that slide in the middle left there was to show you the roof structure, which is a series of extremely elaborate cast iron trusses. The next slide I'm going to show you kind of explains that a little bit more, but just basically for every 20 years or so, that building has to be re-roofed because it is so exposed to the marine environment that the shingles that roof that building, basically the nails all rust and the shingles start to fall off. So basically that's one of the challenges of this particular environment. But through all of those centuries, if you like, of ebb and flow of weather, this building has stood up relatively well, even though it's seriously showing its age. But the other aspect of this particular site, which I really want to draw your attention to, is shown in that bottom left building, which is the outbuildings which I've highlighted are in decay. And if you look at the plan in the center of the screen, you notice these little squares and rectangles to the left of the main building. Those are all outbuildings which support the hospital. So the main galleried two-story structure is actually where the wards are and where the patients are. But all the other little blocks to the left, to the west of those are, as you can see in Oliver Cox's drawing, the dispensary, washing house, operating rooms, kitchen, etc. So all of those buildings are brick buildings, more conventional buildings, which Hall didn't bother too much about. Those were more traditional construction. But unfortunately, those are the buildings which have suffered so much over the years and really are in serious and dire need. And those are the kind of lost and abandoned elements of this particular site, which are seriously in need of repair. And these are sort of 18-inch thick brick structures. And you know, one of the things about brick in this context is that brick does not do very well in an earthquake. So these brick structures would potentially predate the main block. And also some of them were built after the main block. So these are structures which are dating probably from 1780 all the way up to maybe 1905. Some of them are actually in situ concrete. In 1907, there was another major earthquake in Kingston, which caused all sorts of problems with some of these buildings as well. And we therefore have this very challenging environment within which we're trying to conserve one of the largest and grandest cast iron structures in the Western Hemisphere, as well as an array of brick structures which are in serious need of repair. To the left of that plan, where it says watering jetty, that is actually Kingston Harbor there. And off the coast, Francis was asking me a little earlier about the earthquake, 1692 earthquake. And I was explaining to him that the bulk of Port Royal, 2/3 of Port Royal actually sank into the harbor after the 1692 earthquake. And the town was rebuilt following that, or had been rebuilt following that. But in actual fact, that underwater city is about to be declared as a World Heritage Site. So all of this area is quite an important area for restoration. I'm highlighting this slide just to kind of enlarge Oliver Cox's little drawing of the Naval Hospital to demonstrate to you another thing about the building, which is that the building had its upper floor enclosed with jalousies. The entire upper floor was enclosed with jalousies. And the cross section on the bottom right kind of gives you an indication. That's Edward Hall's drawing, his own drawing, which kind of gives you a very clear understanding now of the centralized brick wards, which were kind of the core of the building. This massive truss, mansard truss, which spans the entire width of the building, in these marvelously designed cast iron uh, elements, which are just a wonder to see the detail of them. And then these extremely large upper and lower piazzas, we call them piazzas here in Kingston, in Jamaica. These large ventilated spaces, which on the ground floor was open and the upper floor was jalousied. To give you a very clear understanding of just how large a structure and how grand a structure this was. And that the fact that this structure was dismantled, was cast at Bowling Iron Works in West Yorkshire, and basically dismantled and shipped to the West Indies and re-erected. So a piece of contemporary engineering, in 1800, 1818, this building would have been absolute cutting edge technology. So we understand the value of it and how important it is. And as a building which has undergone very, very little maintenance, over its 200-year history, it's one of the projects that we really do need international pressure and support to try and ensure that it lasts another 200 years. I'm going to move on now. I'm moving on to the Garrison Building. But just to highlight in that yellow dot in the map, that's again where the Naval Hospital is, and north of that area is the Caribbean, is the harbor. On the south of that area is the Caribbean Sea. And the blue circle below that yellow dot is the Garrison Building. So the Garrison Building was one of the military laboratory, and you have to understand this entire section of Port Royal was devoted to the Navy. In fact, the entire peninsula was devoted to the Navy. If you study this 1822 Burns map, you'll notice a number of fortifications. This was a very long peninsula connected back to Kingston. And you can see a number of the dockyards on the right-hand side or the north side of the peninsula of the town. You can see a number of walls which are sort of dividing the dockyard area from the main part of the town, and you can see Fort Charles extreme left or west of this map. So a number of very, very critical, very key buildings. But the second building that I'm wanting to highlight is where that blue circle is, and that's the Garrison Building. Garrison Building is around 1800, and it's timber. It's a timber frame building, 2 stories. You can notice from the bottom left that the low floor framing is a very substantial timber frame, extremely braced, supporting a timber floor, and the balloon frame, which is shown in the photograph above it, shows the upper floor with the timber roof above that. And the top right image and the bottom right image show the sort of very functional, very practical cross section of these buildings, which again was a centralized core with these verandas on the outside, both upstairs and downstairs. So this, in a sense, is a kind of a timber micro example of the Naval Hospital. But again, a very important building in describing or reflecting the very strong timber tradition that the British Navy brought to Jamaica. In fact, the ground floor structure was almost certainly the material which was rescued from one of many ships which would have sunk, which would have been available for gutting to reconstruct the ground floor of this building. And many of those timbers almost certainly derived from one or other ship that got stranded or was scuppered in Port Royal at some point. So this building, 1800, very important, very significant piece of Port Royal history, uh, which which in the mid 1980s we were in the process of restoring. And one of the reasons why we were in the process of restoring this building when I was working for the Urban Development Corporation was there was an enormous amount of buzz around trying to preserve Port Royal. In fact, I remember in 1985, I think the Queen came to Jamaica and came to visit Port Royal. And we were very keen to show off the work that was being done. I think she went to Fort Charles and she did a little walk along some of the areas in front of, including the Garrison building. And so there was quite a lot of hiatus of effort in the mid 1980s to try and preserve Port Royal in its entirety, including what I will show you a little bit further on was a very important street called a business street called Lime Street. So the Garrison building, I'm highlighting the Garrison building as an example of a high quality timber structure. I was highlighting the Naval Hospital as an example of cutting edge cast iron technology. No, we're going to be going back to those buildings, but I just want to introduce you now to, we're going to travel about 20 kilometers or so to Spanish Town, which used to be the capital of Jamaica up to 1872. And there's a very important square in Spanish Town. Actually, it has the architectural reputation of being the most beautiful Georgian square in the Caribbean. But I think it needs a lot of work to basically allow it to hold on to that title. And one of the reasons is because of the challenges that we have in preserving our built heritage, including this particular one. So this is Manchester House, late 18th century. And this, I think the reason why this is called Manchester House is because I think there was a time when this was occupied by the Earl of Manchester, who would have been a landowner in Jamaica, and so would have had, I think he was, if not lieutenant governor, had a very high role in the administration of the affairs of the country when the governor was here in station. I can hear my sister Suzanne probably correcting me now. She probably knows a lot more about that side of things than I do. But suffice it to say that this was an extremely important townhouse in Black River, in Spanish Town, and was a very, very prominent piece of architecture, exhibiting and displaying many of the features of what we call Jamaican Georgian architecture. Very well proportioned, two-story brick structure, and adapted in the appropriately in a vernacular style to suit the tropical climate, with this two-story, what we call piazza. It's kind of an odd nomenclature, but it's this two-story galleried frontage that was kind of there to keep the sun out, to keep private eyes out of the private rooms, or public eyes out of the private rooms, shall I say. And a number of architectural features that you would see, these sort of cooler boxes. If you look at the image on the top right, these cooler boxes, which are a feature that you see in all over parts of the Caribbean. You see them in Bahamas, you see them in Bermuda, you see them in a number of Caribbean islands. These boxes which permit air to flow but keep the light out and give you privacy. So this particular example of brick combined with timber, with shingled roofs, beautiful details, timber details. You can see the beautifully carved posts and beam structures. You can see the brickwork, which actually is what looks like London stock brick. Brick that was made in Jamaica was actually not this color. It was a reddish color that was made locally. So a number of these bricks, or all of these bricks, would have come as ballast on ships coming from the UK, which is one of the reasons why it's such a difficult building to maintain, to preserve. So just to explain further, on the bottom right, you can see that Brent Fontaberry, who is a very important figure in recording some of Jamaica's brick structures, has come with his LiDAR camera and done a scan of the brickwork of Manchester House, and you can see therefore how sort of complex this particular building is as a piece of Caribbean architecture. And you can see, of course, the shingled roofs and the kind of materiality which is very reminiscent of a tropical environment. So the last structure I'm going to show you, which is of importance to discuss today, is the Cave Valley chimney, which is an 1800s or thereabouts stone and brick chimney, which was part of a sugar estate in the heart of Jamaica. Jamaica had an enormous number, I think something like 800 sugar estates in its heyday. And after emancipation in 1834, there was a serious decline in the sugar industry in Jamaica and in the Caribbean in general, but definitely in Jamaica up until the sort of early part of the 19th century. There was an enormous amount of investment in the technology of sugar and rum and molasses and all the other things that go along with them. And this particular flue was part of a sugar works. We could not find any evidence of the sugar works, but why we were brought to take a look at this particular chimney was because it was in a perilous state. You can see from the drawing in the center left, there's a blue dotted line that kind of shows that when we got to the chimney, there's a noticeable tilt in the chimney, which was a result of some problems with the base of it, particularly the stone base. But you can see from the top right that in the year 2000, the Jamaica National Heritage Trust actually declared it a national monument. And so in the bottom right, you can see that the Heritage Trust is there trying to ascertain exactly what's going on with this chimney. And one of the things that we discovered was that people were planting, carrying out quite a bit of agriculture around the base of it. So, but when you look at this chimney, you see this amazingly beautifully detailed structure, which is part stone up to kind of mid-height, and then above that, it in the red section is this beautiful coarse brick with soldier courses and quite a beautiful topping which just makes this the most magnificent piece of architecture. And the idea was that we were going to try and save this structure. So I've shown you four buildings or four structures which I'm looking at the original status. So I'm going to very quickly now run through what the current status of these buildings is. And starting back, we've gone back to Port Royal now, and we're showing you a little bit more about the Naval Hospital. So the current status of the Naval Hospital is that the cast iron structure is being reasonably well preserved, although you can see quite a lot of evidence where there is serious rusting taking place in a number of the connectors. One of the big problems that we have with the Naval Hospital is that because the upper jalousie is open to the weather, the rain has entered the upper floor. And one of the things that's happened over time is that because this building is part brick core, it has a brick core, and in fact the cast iron structure above, the roof structure, is actually sitting on this brick core. The brick core has settled differentially to the cast iron core, and so what you have is a very slight inner deflection of the upper slab, and with the jalousies upstairs being open, when it rains, the rain finds its way to that brick core. In other words, when you're walking along the upper gallery, you're walking at a very, very slight, not even noticeable, but when water is running on the surface, you can see the water collecting along the inner surface of those brick walls. And so one of the challenges is to try and keep that weather out, to try and stop the problems of rain coming in and damaging the inner brickwork. The other problem is, which you can see in the facing of the brick, is that there's an enormous amount of efflorescence because the high water table in Port Royal is ever present. There is an enormous amount of salt air intrusion onto the brickwork, so there's always efflorescence. And over time, people have tried to render this brickwork, and of course, you render brickwork and you have the salts behind it, it just blows off again. So there are a number of challenges to trying to protect and preserve this particular structure. But thankfully, the cast iron structure is holding its own, even though it's showing its age. But there are an enormous amount of challenges to try and keep the weather out of this building, particularly the very large roof. So that is one of the reasons why I think up to now, this particular building, some 30 odd years after Hurricane Gilbert struck in 1988, there is still no permanent use for this beautiful grand old lady. So that's the current status of the Naval Hospital. The current status of the Garrison Building, however, is that in 1988, the said Hurricane Gilbert, and if I took you back to the earlier images, you would have seen one image where there were some casuarina trees, some beautiful trees that were across the road, which during Gilbert, when we were in the middle of restoration, toppled over and knocked the entire thing flat. So between 1988 and now, this is the remnants of the Garrison Building. There have been times when there has been an attempt to reconstruct the Garrison Building. There have been times when there was an attempt to reconstruct a section of the Garrison Building. There was a time when there was a consideration to try and make it a single-story building. One of the things that you can see in these photographs is the enormous sort of wealth of you could almost do a degree in timber technology just to try and understand the ways in which they have the numerous types of joints which have been utilized in this particular building to try and uh, uh, rescue and repair this building over time. One of the reasons why you look in the central photograph and you see that the timber posts are sitting on concrete pillars is that those timber posts, when we encountered them in the middle of the 1980s, had rotted. And the structural solution for this was to actually prop the building up, slice off the offending base of these posts, and then reset them on these little stud columns. The problem with doing this, of course, is that you lose continuity. I'm no structural engineer, but one of the things that we've learned is that in the Caribbean, with the challenges that you get from wind and earthquake, lateral stability is an extremely important thing. And you only have to look at the top right image to see what happens if you don't brace something in multiple directions. You create all sorts of pin joints, which basically encourage a structure to move in one particular direction. So that is the current status of the Garrison building. So at the moment, the Garrison building is a lost and abandoned building, sadly, until such time as we have some enlightened and deep-pocketed people to come and assist in reconstructing this beautiful building. So that's the Garrison building. This is what is left of the Manchester House in Spanish Town. In 2022, the front wall of the Manchester House collapsed. And this was a year after our consulting engineers from overseas, Clive Dawson and co, did an extensive structural investigation of this particular building, made a number of recommendations and a number of warnings that unless something was done very quickly, there was going to be a danger of a collapse of the upper walls of the structure. And not 1 year later, following some very heavy rains, the front wall fell out. Now, I have to tell you that this particular building is owned by the Jamaica National Heritage Trust. I don't feel proud of that fact. The fact is that National Heritage Trust does its utmost to try and preserve the enormous wealth of heritage that we have in Jamaica, but we have to find ways of resourcing the National Heritage Trust in a way that permits them to look after, such beautiful structures as the Manchester House in Spanish Town. Brick is a structure. Brick is a process in Jamaica which is always going to be a structural challenge. It is possible to preserve a brick building such as Manchester House, but it requires a number of things to happen. Number one is that you have to keep water out of the brick joints. If you have a leaking roof and you have water basically washing mortar out of brick joints, you're going to have a problem. This is all organic material. That's one thing. The other thing is that brick doesn't perform extremely well. Unreinforced brick doesn't perform very well in an earthquake environment because it doesn't have the kind of stability to resist the thrusts of an earthquake. And the earthquake in 1907 is a very good example of that. I don't know how much time I have, Francis. You can tell me if I need to rush. So that's Manchester House. In 2022, the Cape Valley chimney in St. Anne, you can see in the center photograph, which is was taken with a sort of a fisheye lens. So it does kind of exaggerate a little bit of the issue that we saw with the Cave Valley chimney, but you can see very clearly that there is a tilt. And beautiful though it is, somebody in their wisdom, on the bottom right two slides, you can see where there was some effort for some reason or the other to remove some of the stone from the base of the structure. In 2022, you can see in the bottom set of photographs that basically the Heritage Trust in 2022 put up a sign to kind of caution people. Sorry, this was in 2024 they put up the sign to caution people to stay away from the structure. And this is what's left of the Cave Valley chimney. In 2024, not long after that sign was erected, the entire thing came down in a heap. And I don't know if this link will work. I don't know if this link will work. Tell me if you can see this.
Yeah, we can see it.
Just come down. Just come down. Come over. You know, come over none at all. You just crumble. Actually, I still like one food over there. So I'm phone panny. I say, you can't just imagine Mr. Job. No. Honestly, I don't even reach home.
And last night, whole night, I can hear from them at about the same gym later. Why do you have to party about them? Smoke man park and then I said, okay.
They're right.
There you have it. So that's basically what is left of the Cave Valley chimney. So that is a truly lost and abandoned structure in Jamaica. So we go to the opportunities. So basically, the Naval Hospital has so much potential. In the 1980s through the 1990s, up to today, there's an attempt to try and find the resources to set up the Naval Hospital and other structures in Port Royal for use in tourism and in sustainable activities, which will permit them to maintain this grand cast iron structure. So the Royal Naval Hospital has, I think, a very good future ahead of it. And again, it's a building of an international note and international worth. The Garrison Building, this is Oliver Cox's drawing, which was done in 1987, of what a garrison building could look like and how it could function as a sort of a craft center, an interpretive center, with upper floor as a tea house and a craft shop. And so our expectation and hope is that, again, there is a possibility and opportunity to rescue the garrison building and make it, bring it alive again. Manchester House, we ourselves have done proposals and submitted proposals that we adaptively reuse Manchester House. My colleague, Ajani Watson, did these drawings showing how we can integrate new and old so that we show the way forward to preserve and protect the heritage, despite the fact that it has collapsed to the extent that it has. Cave Valley is lost, but I want to particularly pay homage to the structural engineers that have that tried so valiantly to protect the Cave Valley chimney. We had 2 years of a talk shop, unfortunately, while trying to protect and preserve this thing. Howard Chin, who is a member of the technical committee, Howard, a very, very capable engineer, came up with these ideas on the left-hand side of restraining the chimney with tiebacks and collars and a number of things. He wrote an extensive paper on it, which Andrew Smith, UK engineer, did a thorough research of and was very keen in trying to help us to analyze what we exactly needed to look at in terms of the footings of this particular chimney, try and identify exactly what the footings were like. We had Julian McMorris, a local engineer who was English UK trained as well, who was prepared to take part in the exercise to try and preserve this particular building. And also Tommy Leo and Julio Chin was involved. We had engineers trying their best to try and get some action moving on this thing. Unfortunately, there was just too much talk at that point when there should have been a lot of action. And the only thing we can perhaps do is learn from this particular loss. So very quickly, 5 minutes, I just want to say, you know, the things that we have challenges about: vulnerabilities to weather events such as hurricanes, flooding, earthquakes, fires, lightning, I beg pardon. Secondly, the exposure to UV, natural weathering due to seasonal and daily temperatures, moisture, wet and dry cycles. Thirdly, we have a lack of maintenance in addressing the natural decay in construction materials used in roofs, walls, windows, floors, and structural elements. Fourthly, we have the impact of termites, vegetation, water ingress, animal life on structures, on the structure rather, enclosures, and on fixtures and fittings. Fifth, we have the impact of deliberate action in neglect, in vandalism, in cultural and societal action, and economic action. And I particularly want to highlight the problem of economic action. We have a situation, particularly in Kingston, where land is much more valuable than heritage. And frankly, it doesn't matter the historical value of anything in Kingston today if the land has far more value than the building that's on it. And then sixth, we have the systemic challenges which are due to inadequate resources, inadequate legislation, inadequate administration, inadequate care, inadequate vision, and in value systems as well. So we have, in my view, six mountains to climb. But Peregrine Bryant reminded me the other day in relation to a joint project that a pessimist sees the difficulty in every opportunity. An optimist sees the opportunity in every difficulty. So let us be optimistic for the future of the built heritage of Jamaica and the Commonwealth. And I thank you all. Francis,
Peter, thank you very much for your wonderful talk and the illustrative projects that you've shown us across 4 very different locations. And you've rightly pointed out the optimism. Some people have put in some questions into the chat box, and I think some of them are really, really pertinent to how you can take some of these projects forward. I'd be very interested to know, and others have put this in as well, what happened to the bricks and stones salvaged from the collapsed chimney, or indeed from other structures collapsed too. I noted, for instance, in the Royal Naval Hospital, there was a pile of building rubble which looked like stonework. And I just wondered if generally that was retained for future use or kept to one side, possibly for restoring other buildings. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about that.
Can I say, in every case that you've mentioned, the right thing to do is to preserve these elements. In fact, when the Cave Valley chimney collapsed, a note was written to the Heritage Trust and to the Parish Council, which was in charge, to preserve the site. Of course, one of the problems is that the roadside that you would have seen in that video is a public road. And it is just by absolute miracle that nobody was hurt in that collapse. But there was a note to request that a team go out and investigate and to preserve and protect that material. At least we could investigate the mortar. We could basically create a monument with the remaining mortar stones. A number of things could have been done. To date, I doubt that anything formal or public has been done to rescue the materials there. My suspicion is that the local authority has simply scooped them up and dumped them in some yard nearby. It is a problem that we have in Jamaica with the follow through of intent. That the intent might be that we're going to do something significant and important to try and preserve and protect, but the reality is that with the lack of funding, rarely do we get to the situation where we preserve these materials for future reuse. My suspicion is that local people basically scoop them up for sale on the side of the road, which is very likely what has happened in this case.
Thank you. We've got a question from Eli Michaela Young, and she asks, you have a lot of challenges. What role is the government taking in leading preservation projects?
Wow. The government is a big institution, and every government agency has a role in preservation. There is a particular ministry under which the Institute of Jamaica and the Heritage Trust fall, and that particular ministry basically is in charge of the entire sort of built heritage of Jamaica, in particular those declared buildings, those declared structures, of which there are several hundred, as you can imagine. We have an extremely dense sort of and rich kind of store of built heritage in Jamaica. And the Jamaica National Heritage Trust, I was telling a colleague earlier today that the Jamaica National Heritage Trust is modeled off of the English National Trust. And the Jamaica National Heritage Trust was set up in the late 50s, well, the National Trust Commission, late 50s, and the Jamaica National Heritage Trust in the late 60s. And then basically there's an act of parliament that the National Trust operates under. But in actual fact, it is so severely under-resourced that there is no hope that the institution as it is today could provide technical or financial or regulatory oversight on this large pot of heritage. One of the things that I was recommending, one of the things that I was trying to do when I was in the UK last time was to actually meet with the institutions that once made up the National Trust in the UK to try and understand how the UK has revised itself to try and address some of the kind of structural issues that you have over in the UK, where you have enormous resources or an enormous stock of heritage. Here in Jamaica, we need to similarly modify our institution, our national trust, to be less of a sort of a regulatory institution and to have a number of arms that allow it to fundraise and to assist people with looking after their heritage properties and to give technical advice and so many other things. But the large problem is lack of resources, unfortunately.
Thank you for that. There have been a few more late questions, and one of them is from Patrick Green. There have also been a number of comments from Rosemary Dodd, which I think might best be viewed in the chat box as observations on a number of things which come back, and I think there's probably a lively conversation to be had. But meanwhile, Pat Green asks, quick question, do you believe there may be an issue of interpretation of the heritage, one that would enable the acceptance of the average Jamaican people?
But I've been following your comments on LinkedIn. Heather Pinnock has recently raised this whole issue. It's a serious issue. I believe that we have to find a way to allow Jamaicans to weigh in on the relevance of particularly British colonial architecture, which I would say over the last 20 years or so has come under fire, really as a kind of a legacy of slavery, as a legacy of colonialism. And one of the reasons why there's not a great deal of public sort of push for our British colonial and post-emancipation heritage to be restored and for public funds to go towards repairing them. I think it's a dialogue that we need to have. We need to understand as a people that we need to interpret heritage not as a legacy of colonialism, but as a resource to be interpreted, to be appropriately interpreted, and to become an economic resource as well. Why on earth we seem time and time again to destroy the very thing that will permit us to recoup some of the resources that we need to do other things. We have to find a way. We have to find a way to engage the Jamaican people and the Caribbean people of the Caribbean in this dialogue of how do we effectively interpret and understand exactly who built these amazing structures. The fact is that we built them ourselves. And so we need to find a way to tell our story through these sites and these monuments, and not basically just leave them to decay and basically do ourselves out of an opportunity to preserve our past and reinterpret it in our own words.
Okay, I think we've got time for one more, and I'm seeing that Peregrine Bryant a while ago wrote in asking, as a holding measure, might at least temporary support be provided to the ancillary buildings at the Naval Hospital? On this area as a whole, what are the potential uses for all of the buildings, including the garrison? And he also mentions presumably sea level rise is also a concern at Port Royal.
Right. Okay. Well, again, Peregrine has exactly my concern about those ancillary buildings, ancillary blocks. There's one in particular which is about to fall to the ground. There is absolutely no reason why we should lose these buildings. They're all single-story buildings. They're not rocket science. They all have potential value, economic value, as well as functional value. We need to find ways to develop the economic potential of Port Royal. Not my kind of wheelhouse, but there's no question in my mind that heritage tourism is a very effective way for us. And again, to go back to Pat's question, that we need to find ways to monetize our heritage. In terms of the sea level rise question, yes, that is an issue. That is a problem. We have to face the fact that we are. I mean, I know you were sitting in 34-degree weather yesterday in London. We have to understand that we're in an environment where we can't just sort of put blinkers on and pretend that these changes are not happening, but we can address and mitigate some of these challenges and throw the science at them. We have AI to help us now. I mean, if we can't figure out the solutions ourselves, let's get the technology to come and help us. But let us do what we can to try and mitigate so that we can protect and preserve our heritage as long as possible.
Thank you, Peter. Now, as that was Peregrine's question, I'm just going to mention that next week, Peregrine himself will be talking about the abandoned houses on St. Helena. And it's an enthralling and fascinating island which has much more to offer than its well-known status as the final residence of Napoleon Bonaparte. The houses mostly date from the latter part of the 18th, the early 19th century, and they were built for the prominent and established families who held important positions in the East India Company during the period before the Suez Canal much reduced the island's commercial importance. So we look forward to hearing more from Peregrine next week. Meanwhile, I thank everybody for attending, and I thank particularly Peter for having spoken today. It's been delightful to see so many interested questions, and I think there may be a number of further discussions which will go on, probably between Rosemary and Elizabeth and Peter and Pat and others who I think will doubtless be able to make some excellent contributions to the future development of many of these sites. I'm seeing that the Tourism Enhancement Fund is fabulously rich, writes Rosemary. I think I might let everyone go now, but thank you very much for attending, and it's been a real pleasure to have the insights of Peter. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation.